you got to manifest some motivation, I guess. Create some of those chips on the shoulder, right? Some of the fake stuff that MJ used to do back in the day. We heard Nance make
Yep.
the Michael Jordan comparison. You gotta find a reason to feel slighted. Maybe that's what the Chiefs need.
Okay, so I do believe there's a difference in these scenarios, and they're actually worth discussing. If you
Mhm.
watch the Chase clip, Jamar Chase, it was not a slight. Now, could Mahomes take it that way? Absolutely. He probably will because he's one of the great ones, and that's what they all do. But he was not criticizing. He was not making fun of. It was completely different than what the Raiders were doing. The Raiders were demeaning Patrick Mahomes, and he will not forget that. The Chase thing was just like, look, Burrow's my guy. He was supporting his quarterback. And,
Right.
it was being a little petty. He didn't want to say his name. But, like, his point was, like, man, we got to get to that level. That's the dude we're chasing. I'm not going to sit here and just bow down to him, though. Like, I believe in us, myself, our guy. I love Joe. Joe's my guy, has been since college. He was giving Mahomes respect. He was basically saying he's the best in the game. He might be the GOAT. But if he does that, then he's kind of like saying my quarterback isn't, which he also
Right.
can't do. He's like in a
No.
no-win situation there for Chase. So I didn't think that was bad. The Raiders thing, you're a bunch of jackasses. That was very stupid. And believe me, I remember it like it was yesterday, seeing Pat Mahomes come into Soldier Field and on one of his touchdowns, as he's laughing his ass off, lighting it up against Trubisky and company. As they're scoring a touchdown, as he's going into the end zone, he's counting the number of players that were drafted ahead of him, including Mitchell Trubisky.
Yeah. I mean, this is what,
He's
like you
going to
said, the
use
great
that.
ones do. Yeah. They
Yep.
find the motivation. And if you think for a second that he isn't
Week
going to
8.
do whatever it takes to hang a 40 spot on the
Put it on the
Raiders in
calendar.
week 8 in
Put it
Vegas,
on the calendar. Mahomes
returning
props
back
week
to the
8.
spot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Returning back to the
Week
spot where
8,
he
week
won the
13.
Super Bowl. Yeah, he's going to
Yeah.
absolutely destroy the Raiders. But that, I think, is actually an interesting kind of break point as we bring up the Week 8 matchup, the first time they play the Raiders out in Vegas. Kind of an interesting break point for this schedule because the first third of it, I would not call it easy by any stretch of the imagination. You just heard Mahomes mention it there. They open up at home, obviously, the kickoff to the season against the Ravens. Then the Bengals come to town. And say what you will about Burrowhead and all that nonsense. Joe Burrow plays well against the Chiefs. The Bengals are a good team. They are an AFC contender. And then you go to Atlanta. We don't know what the Falcons are going to be, but again, it's your first road game against maybe Cousins and a Falcons team that is figuring some things out on offense. We'll see. And then a division game on the road against maybe the one team in the division that could give you some headaches, the Chargers, before you host the Saints on a Monday night, get your bye in week 6, and then go to San Francisco in week 7. All of that happens before that Raiders game we just mentioned on the road in Vegas week 8. And, if Kansas City were to be, 3-3 going into that Raiders game in week 8, it wouldn't be entirely shocking. It would be a disappointment, I think, for Chiefs fans who think they're going to cakewalk their way to 13-4, but it wouldn't totally shock me.
I don't like to admit it, but everything that Alex told us about how Chiefs fans are feeling about if you didn't get us last year, when are you going to get us?
Yeah,
I think he's right. Like, they
feels
weren't
true.
even that impressive last year. Like, it felt like 11-6, it was a down year, and what happens, they go out and win the Super Bowl. They were 8th in points in the AFC. AFC, not the NFL. 8th in points in the AFC with Mahomes. I do wonder how much more Kelsey has. He was clearly
Yeah.
saving what he had for the postseason. It worked, but so is he going to save all of the regular season this year? I think that's a bit of a concern, but what did they do? They combated that by bringing in multiple weapons, and we don't know what's happening with Rice. So I think that's a question mark. What are you going to get out of Kelsey in the regular season? How much do you need out of Kelsey? Will Rice be available to play? And what do all these new pieces do, including Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy? All very fair questions. MVS was a non-factor last year. You're not going to miss him. I know the left tackle's a question. but Donovan
Mhm.
Smith didn't play well. That's the other part. Outside of Snead, the Chiefs are saying goodbye to players that didn't perform either. Like, okay, yeah, new left tackle, it's a very important position, but the guy they had last year wasn't great. So is it really that big of a factor?
Chris Jones, 25-1 for Defensive Player of the Year. No, thank you. 18-1
No.
sack leader, ninth on the board. No, thank you. I think Chris Jones got paid, and that's great. Chris Jones can still be productive, but I think the one to watch as far as putting up defensive numbers, especially in the front seven, especially getting to the quarterback, is Karlaftis. He's at 8.5 sacks. I wouldn't be surprised to see him hit the over there. You saw him, especially the second half of the season last year, start to come into his own. So that's a number I like. There's really not a lot of other individual season-long player props on the board with the Chiefs that I'm a huge fan of, given the value.
Which receiver is going to have the Rice roll this upcoming season? That's the big question. So Alex Gold thought he's thinking Hollywood Brown. And I'll tell you something that I would say would support that is, of the receivers, he's got the lowest number. Kelsey's is higher. Worthy's numbers higher than Brown. I mean, that's ridiculous. And if you look at Brown's career, like, yes, he spent those years in Baltimore, but Lamar missed a handful of games. He also had a year where Huntley played some, Josh Johnson
Mm-hmm.
played some, got some RG3 games in there. In the last 2 years in Arizona, he played with so I wouldn't overreact to the numbers that we saw with the Cardinals. 2 years ago, McCoy started 3, McSorley started a game. I mean, last year Dobbs started 8, Clayton Tune started a game. He's been with some awful quarterbacks the last 2 years with Kyler constantly injured.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point to be made that Mahomes can elevate his receivers, no doubt. He's the best quarterback in the league, and I would trust him to do that to an extent with Hollywood Brown. But I also look at Hollywood Brown and say, when has he ever, even in an individual week, forget a season, an individual week, helped his quarterback take his. And look, Patrick Mahomes, I get it. Again, there's nowhere really to level up from if you're Patrick Mahomes. But typically, number one wide receivers do that. They help their quarterback out in certain weeks where maybe they just don't have it, or maybe the offensive line is a disaster one week and the quarterback's just firing up prayers, or isn't on target because he's under constant pressure. And does that number one wide receiver work as that security blanket? I know Kelsey is that in this offense, but they just don't have a true wide receiver one still in this receiving core. And I think they'll
No.
continue to rely on Kelsey to be that security blanket, that comfort zone for Mahomes. And I understand why. Until you see the drop off, there's no reason for him not to be that guy. But like, Marquise Brown is not that dude. And I think in the first, again, whatever it ends up being, 6 to 8 weeks that they're without Rice, they've got to have a complementary target to Kelsey, somebody that can, like Alex talked about, stretch the field, give them that deep threat, and actually hold on to the football, unlike last year's deep threats. And I don't know if I count on Hollywood Brown to be that guy. Maybe in flashes, a singular play here and there, but on a consistent basis through the first half of the season, while Reed is still slowly folding Xavier Worthy into things, I think they are gonna suffer just a bit from a lack of targets to spread the ball around to in the first half of the season until Rice comes back, until Worthy is been fully integrated into the offense. And I don't know if Hollywood Brown is the guy I trust to pick up all of that slack. To beat 750 receiving yards, okay, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But to be a true wide receiver one, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's certainly fair. And the market is saying, no, he's not a wide receiver one. Like I
Yeah.
mentioned, there's other receivers on this team that have higher numbers. The prop numbers are beatable, though, is my overall point in this system
Yeah.
with this quarterback. When he was with Lamar, his receiving touchdowns were 7, 8, and 6. Well, the number's 4.5 for this year
Yeah.
with Patrick Mahomes, a much better quarterback than Lamar, and the trash he was playing with in Arizona. So touchdown wise, I do like him to go over that. Yardage wise, 750.5. He was over that in his second and third year in the league with Baltimore. did not touch that with Arizona for good reason. So I can buy into that a little bit. I would not bet on Kelsey stuff. I would not bet on Kelsey overs. No. It's just, yeah, I know you just don't have to. It's unnecessary. He's going to have weeks where he snaps. Of course, that's always the case. But throughout the second half last year, you just got the sense that he was coasting. And I'm not saying he's not trying. Yeah. I'm saying that what's more important is the playoffs, and they all understand that. So I don't know that you're going to get that 100% effort week in, week out, which is what you would need for these props to hit.
How threatened do you think the Chiefs feel by this new look Chargers team, if at all?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a homer, but honestly, the division is not something that's discussed a whole lot heading into this season in Kansas City. Some of it is just the track record of 7+ division titles, but also, for many, many off seasons, there's been plenty of discussion about the Chargers, right? And this is the year they're going to break through, and it just hasn't happened. I think people here understand the Harbaugh hire and feel like at some point he's going to get them figured out. Maybe it's not in year one, though, because all he has done is have success wherever he goes. But looking at the roster, and it was needed to kind of clear out some of the aging veterans and some of the issues they had, I think this is more of a, hey, let's see what happens after this season, and then heading into next year, perhaps we're actually talking about a Chargers team being a real threat in the division. But there's nobody really that I can tell you from the Chiefs' perspective in Kansas City actually fears or certainly think is capable of winning a division over Kansas City. Doesn't mean that they're going to sweep the division. Of course not. We saw what happened on Christmas Day where the Raiders just beat up on Kansas City. We saw the weird Broncos game. So there could be a game where somebody gets them. Heck, the Chargers might split with Kansas City this year. But in terms of truly threatening, I just don't believe anybody here is really concerned or honestly entertaining the fact that the Chiefs wouldn't win the division.
Over or under 11.5 wins?
Going over. I'm going over. Last year was kind of an outlier under Andy Reid where they haven't gone over their total. And so I think they get back to that. As I mentioned, I just think this team is set up better than they were a year ago. Even if you look at the defense and say, all right, they lose L'Jarius Sneed, maybe they take a slight step backwards. All right, so maybe they're not top 3, but let's say they slide to a top 8 defense, which I think is more than fair for them this season. Offensively, are they really going to be the 13th or 14th highest scoring offense again? I just don't buy it. I think there's a chance we see the crazy Mahomes numbers again this upcoming season. And they mentioned, despite winning the Super Bowl, they didn't have fun in the regular season a year ago. And so I think there's no question of complacency or anything like that with this group heading into the season. So I would feel comfortable taking the over 11.5. In fact, I think that's the play more so than a -220 division bet or whatever the number is right now at BetMGM.